Hello, my IB students. I'm missing you all in this time of quarantine. I can't wait till we're back together. We can see each other's faces again. I hope everybody's healthy and doing well. This video today has been prompted by some of your questions as you start doing the extended essay. I want to thank all of you who have come to office hours over the last 2 weeks, have been emailing me questions. Please keep doing that. I want to help very much. I want to help you get started on sort of this very special sort of IB effort, this sort of senior project. Your first college term paper, the IB extended essay. This is a special thing, really. It's definitely one of the IB things where you all get to have the most choice about what you're going to do. It's definitely something that when you're done with it, you can feel very proud that you finished it, that most high school students don't do something like the extended essay, and yet student to student, the vast majority of our students successfully complete the IB extended essay. Today is just sort of just sort of toe in the water look at it. What is the EE? What are some good things to know about the extended essay? What are some basic things to think about? And so we're kind of just going to walk through that a bit today. I want to talk about a few things on slides as we kind of roll along here. Um, so uh, some very first basic things. The EE is a college term paper. It is an investigative research paper, and all of those words there being very important. You're going to conduct an investigation, and that is primarily done through doing college level research that you will compose with your own opinion and analysis into a final paper. So you are doing an investigation to find something out. It is built around a complex research question. And this is a very sort of the central thing. It's the first thing the E gets graded on. You will develop a question. I don't give it to you. IB doesn't give it to us. You will develop a question that you want to answer. A typically strong EE is 3,800 to 4,000 words. The parts of the words that count are the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Usually the good one's about 3,800 words. 4,000 for those items is the maximum IB allows for the EE. It uses formal sources and MLA citation. It is a research paper. You will have a works cited page of just the things that you use in the paper. You will also do in-text citations, doing citations of the sources inside the paper in college term style. Some of those things might be new to you, so you may have to unlearn some bad research habits to complete a college level term paper. But you're going to get lots of support for that, and we're here to help very much. It is also tied to one or more IB subject areas. That's one of the things we're going to look at today. That's one of the first choices you have to make. So one thing to consider about the EE is we say the extended essay. There's really a lot of different kinds of extended essays, and while they all have some things in common, none of them is exactly like the other. First and foremost, there's really sort of two broad, sort of very broad types of EEs. This first one represented on this slide is sort of the classical IB extended essay, the one IB has used for decades, which is a research paper that is built around a particular IB subject, particularly for you guys, a class that you have. And so that's one of the first things you want to think about. Am I going to be researching literature? Am I going to do an English type paper? There's other types, but there's that. Am I going to do something related to a language and culture that I am studying? Am I doing history analysis? Am I doing mathematical analysis? Am I studying environmental issues? Am I doing a biology experiment? And am I analyzing art or art styles? Am I analyzing issues related to psychology? Am I doing investigative research into world religions? Each of those subjects expects different things, and often some people are really drawn to, hey, I want to do something in this. I like this class. I have a subject related to this class. And the EE guide I have up on Schoology has a lot more depth on each of these. I'll say a little bit about them as we go on. Full depth into each of these is going to be a whole nother presentation. And so, because they really can't be compared, an ESS is not like a biology EE, is not like an art EE, is not like a psychology EE. They expect different things. They have some sort of different rules and guidelines for what makes a good paper, and so immediately we see some differences. Like, you really can't compare a student doing history EE to a student doing English EE to a student doing art EE. They're all really, really different animals. Research is involved in all of them. Conclusions and questions are involved in all of them. But what goes on is very, very different. And some of these subjects are very narrow in what they allow, and some are very broad. You will see a couple things. There are different, two of the subjects, both English and your world language. That's the Spanish and French for Hunter's Lane. There are different, even subtypes of EEs below that. That's also probably a subject for another presentation. We'll allude to a little bit as we go on. You will note one odd little exception over here. World religions. What is this? We don't have a class in world religions on Hunter's Lane. However, we have had a few students, due to certain strong backgrounds and willing to do the deep research into it, do interesting comparisons of religions or exploration of sort of issues in religions. And we have had some successful papers over the year in that IB class, even though we don't teach it. It's about the only subject we have left anymore in which you can do a single subject without the class. We've tried a couple sort of bolt students and other subjects over the years, and there's been some success with it, but not a lot. You're taking 2 to 3 times more work upon you if you try to do something in a class that you don't have. However, we've kept world religions as an exception. We've had a couple students, sometimes there's usually 1 to 2 every year, who can do a good job in it, and so that's the one exception. The other type of EE, which is becoming one of my favorite types, and is just something I think of, if you were just totally lost with where you want to start this thing, you might want to consider a world study EE. Instead of being built around an IB subject, world study EEs are built around an issue or problem. They call it the global local focus. You will look at a problem that affects multiple cultures in the world by studying very particular examples. Their most highlighting feature about them is they use multiple IB subjects to understand an issue. That's required. So you look at something in an English and a history context. You mix art and psychology. How could you do that? Well, that's why it's kind of interesting. The student kind of comes up with how it's going to work. It can get pretty creative. And so you use 2 to 3 IB subject areas to dig into that problem. And it's also, what's really important with EEs is that you have very specific examples. You know, you're not just, for example, going to study bullying. You're going to look at these particular issues in countries or cities or societies, and then use them, both the subjects, to talk about what we can say more bullying broadly. You're not just, for example, talking about climate change. You're talking at a specific environmental example somewhere, and what analyzing that through both subjects can teach us about the issue as a whole. So it's really important to have specific examples. It leads to a lot more creativity than single subject EEs. They do have one rule. Since the students are so free to combine IB subjects in some really surprising ways, IB sometimes has to decide, you can do a lot of creative things. You do have to fit your EE inside one of these 6 themes. The themes themselves do not have extra rules. They're sort of organization for IB, so you can do a culture, language, and identity world studies paper. You can do conflict, peace, and security. Those are just guide words. There's not a lot more sort of say about them. They don't come with extra rules. One thing is worth saying is, just your topic has to fit inside one of those themes somewhere. It doesn't have to meet every word. Your paper could be highly about culture and language, for example, but not really focus on identity. That's okay. You could talk a lot about something about science and how that affects greater culture and society. Look at that through different themes. Study something in science, look at it in psychology. Maybe you don't really go into the tech realm. That's okay. That's allowed. And we've I mean, these have kind of been around 6, 7 years. We started having the kids do a few of them, and the last couple years, they're approaching half the EEs we do, sometimes more. And I think sometimes we do so much interdisciplinary teaching at Hunter's Lane, lots of things from different subjects fit together. I think a lot of Hunter's Lane students have had very good mindsets when they approach a World Studies EE. Am I overly pushing that way? I hope not. We do have very good single subject AEs, but I think sometimes for kids who are stuck, this is a really cool place to begin. And so I really just kind of want to highlight that. All right, so let's talk about research questions. Every EE, World Studies, single subject, matters not, is fit around a research question that the student develops. They are complicated. They can be analytical, and it's often the first place a student can encounter problems with what am I going to do with the subject, or they're getting lost somewhere in it. And a lot of it comes down to their research question. We're going to show some examples here in just a minute. A research question should not be yes, no. That's an absolute nope, nope, nope. It shouldn't be just what happened in a time period. It's an investigation. You want something to find out. You want to be analyzing something. You want to have opinions. They can get very, very long. And they can be very, very specific what they want to analyze. And often the more clear and pointed a research question is about exactly what the paper is going to talk about, often the better the paper is. The research question sort of becomes the guide for the paper. The reader can see what they're going to talk about, and the student's being very specific on, here's what I'm going to investigate. So let's look at a couple, for example. This is a very typical example from history of a very poor history question, like what happened in the Civil Rights era? That's really broad. The Civil Rights era is huge. There were lots of different people in lots of different places. That's a paper that lends to just reporting facts. That's often a problem with a lot of the history papers. The student who says, I want to do something with the Civil Rights era, probably they go do some research, and you hope they come up with something like the better question, like how did the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee influence language use in the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s? That's very specific. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they worked, led by Stokely Carmichael, they worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They became one of the sort of rallying forces for students, sort of protesting for equal rights. You would hope that student, they start with something like the poor question, because most people do, and that's okay. You start from a place of mess. You do research, and it leads you into something more specific like that. And that usually what makes a good history paper. The poor ones that just sort of lend to just here's some basic facts about the Civil Rights era, but there's not really an analysis or kind of really digging into kind of the meat about something, typically do not score well. And when I say typically, I mean every single time. Psychology, we've done a lot of these over the year. And often we kind of see this problem here. So do adverse child experiences influence development of children? Well, yes, they do. That's why we call them adverse child experiences. They're bad. I just answered that entire extent of the essay. We wouldn't call them bad if they didn't. And so better is exploring that. So what does the science of psychology have to say about ACEs? What does it have to say about trauma? And more than just that trauma is bad, but what do we do about it? And so someone starts with the poor question, and that leads to, I'm going to research something about ACEs. I'm going to look at something about psychology, it says about how to treat it, and I'm going to weigh things. So what about art therapy versus animal therapy versus cognitive therapy? Like, when are these better? Do they match up with particular kind of abuses? Is there a time when certain therapies for these things aren't good? And so you really want to do a deep dive into the topic and analysis. Like you're taking, and this is what you often kind of see. You see the student looking at these psychology issues. They're pulling out the studies, but they're doing the weighing of them themselves. And you're doing the deep dive. So, and that's often how these EEs work. The student finds out all the facts, they present the facts, but then they do the weighing of them. So this study says this, and this study says this, and this study says this. What can I, therefore, say about ACEs, adverse child experiences, types of therapy, from what I have learned? what seems to be best practice. And it's that weighing of these things that the good EEs reach and the bad ones usually don't. ESS, for example, are elephants in danger of extinction? I have lots of students who like to do things on endangered animals. That's cool. They're endangered. Let's talk about it. But yeah, the elephants are endangered. This is generally a problem. Like we have to have care for them. If you can answer it with a Google question, it's not a good EE. It may be a topic you want to start exploring, but that's not a good research question. If we have to ask the question that the elephants are in danger, the elephants are probably in danger. Here's better. All right. So you want to have that sort of that analysis of it. So we have endangered elephants in India. We have endangered elephants in Africa. What are we doing differently there? I don't know. I'd have to go find out. I'd do the investigation. Is one better than the other? Are they doing very similar? How did the history of treating both these populations? Have they changed? Is one doing a better job than other? Do they have different kinds of threats? What do we do with that? So I'm going to present it, talk about it, maybe even make recommendations about it. What seems to be best practice in different places in taking care of elephants? Or is it different based on location? That's the kind of deep stuff you'd want to come out of with an ESS paper. You want to become the expert at the of who's trying to save the elephants. You get to be the student. You get to make that call. You get to change the world. That's what's kind of cool about the EE. Here's a world studies type. That's CLI. That's a conflict, language, and identity theme. That's a common shorthand for it. How are English and Spanish different? Well, they're different languages. I like the food of one of them better. And those of you who know me, you know which one. No. I have had a world study. You wouldn't think about this, and I really put this one down here. Our first year we had world studies. This was the actual topic, and it got a B for my B, and I was like, how in the world would someone combine English and Spanish as subjects? Student graduated 2014, Cal Donaghy. This is sort of a paraphrase of it. Spain has a language board that decides what the official Spanish words are going to be. English has no such thing. She compared how it had affected both the languages. Both in looking at English history linguistically and Spanish sort of history linguistically. How would they change? A comparison of English and Spanish using the tools of English Category 3, which deals with language and culture, and Spanish Category 1, which deals with the history of language and Spanish. And she compared both of them. A real sort of cross-cultural look at language. That's the kind of stuff world studies can do. That's just very interesting. And learning what she had used in both languages. World Studies, Science, Technology, and Society, that's the STS. What are ethical issues with robots? Well, I'm sure there's some. They're really broad, but that paper reads like you're just going to list me out some various ethical issues. But World Studies is combining things like history and information technology for something like this. So what could you learn from history to tell you about a modern issue? You would say information technology. Profit, one, is that an IB subject? Yes, it is. Two, we don't have that. One of the cool things about world studies is it's easier sometimes with a little extra research to pull things from other IB subjects from classes that you are not in. We've had several successful world studies papers like that. What can a similar thing in history, can I apply it to a modern problem? And that's also how you can use history sometimes information to talk about a modern problem. IB not usually allowing the discussion of history with things less than 10 years old. What about Spanish? Yes, you can do one in Spanish. Here's a poor question. Why is soccer important in El Salvador? I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but you're really going to have trouble analyzing that, because what you're going to say, well, it's important in the culture. Here's something a little more if you want to deal with culture. Like, what historical and cultural factors led to the decline of the use of vosotros in Central America? Your world language papers usually have to be about how something culturally has affected the language. Both of those parts usually have to be there. There's also a literature option. If you would prefer to study literature from your language. Note the one sort of buyer beware here. If you do something in your in sort of your world acquisition language, your group 2 language, your question and paper have to be written in the target language itself. I'm not doing it right here for simplicity factors, but the better question would actually be in Spanish if you were doing this. Some basic tips for beginning. You can come to an EE from a lot of places. It doesn't have to be a big shaking world issue. It can be something locally, something that sparks your interest. You may think of just something that you could dig deeper into. EEs come from a lot of places. I think sometimes the weirder and wilder, the cooler the EE is. Our top scoring one was a paper comparing English paper comparing how two books used language to talk about leprosy. Um, that's really far out. It was a really cool paper to read. I mean, feel free to kind of let it run wild. I'd love to give people more examples as we kind of come on. I've seen some really cool things from our students, and this is the second thing because many of y'all are perfectionists. EE start from a place of mess. I said it before. I'm going to say it again. You don't start off in EE and do it perfectly. You throw a lot of options around. You play with them. You change your mind. You research. You change your research question a little. You go back to some things. You ask for help. You get some writer's block. You deal with it. You get over it. That's all very normal. EE start from a place of mess, and you're going to build something out of that. Um, you've got a bunch of different colored Lego blocks, and you're going to use some of them, and you change your mind all the way through. And you, first of all, you want them to be all blue, and then you're like, no, a little blue and a little green. Then you're like, but red for the top. And then you're like, you're going to mess it up. And then you change your mind, and you move it around, and eventually you come up with an EE. So right now you just have things back through your head. Maybe you're blank. You just have a bunch of Legos spilled over the floor, and you're going to slowly decide what you want to do with them. That is, I think, one of the better metaphors I could use for the extended essay. Just again, one tip. I really encourage you to not do something single subject that you don't have a class in. That is usually a step to a very bad EE experience your senior year. Profit, have a couple people tried it? Yes. Did you warn them against doing it? Yes, you did. Did they do it? Well, of course they did not. Listen to Mr. P. Some final things, as you may want to think about your writing style a bit. How much research do you want to be doing? You definitely have to do some very professional research. Some of the subjects tend to rely a lot more on having lots and lots and lots of sources to help tell the information, while some are far, far more heavier on the student is going to analyze something for a very sort of extensive part of time. Now, hear me very carefully here. All of these things have both. You have to do some good, solid professional research for all these things, but some of these subjects are just tend to expect as a norm a lot more heavier use of sources. That's history, psychology, world religions. Some that tend to use fewer, and they tend to rely a lot more on the students really sort of digging into it and leading the discussion. English, art, math, world studies can bounce around a lot. I just thought about most of the ones we had. I kind of put it there. There's exceptions. World language and ESS kind of operate the middle. One thing worth knowing, biology as a single subject requires an experiment. You cannot do a pure secondary source alone biology paper. However, you wouldn't necessarily need an experiment if you used biology and something else inside a world studies paper. Again, if you've not looked at the EE Prezi I have up on Schoology, look at some of these subjects inside the EE guide. There's a small chapter on each of them, and start really thinking about them. And I am here to help. Please send me your questions. Take care, guys. Happy researching.